Imagine you take a student who completely failed high school physics, just bombed it. Give them exactly 10 months and tell them to achieve an elite top-tier rank in one of the most brutally competitive medical exams on the planet.
Right, which statistical logic says just cannot be done.
Exactly. It's functionally impossible. But the stack of sources we are pouring over today actually proves that assumption entirely wrong. So welcome to today's deep dive. Our mission here is unpacking a true zero-to-hero execution roadmap for the NEET UG exam.
And we are talking about going for an all-India rank, an ARR of under 1,000.
Yeah, and just to set the baseline for you listening right now so you understand the sheer scale of this challenge, we're talking about roughly 2.4 million candidates fighting for, what, about 50,000 government medical seats?
Yeah, around that. It's intensely competitive. And to break into that top 1,000, our sources show you need a staggering score of about 705 to 710 out of a total 720 marks.
Which is wild. So if you're listening on your commute right now, think about that margin of error. It is practically non-existent. You basically have to be perfect.
Right, which is exactly why we have to approach this conversation through a very specific lens. Think of this as a mentor-student dialogue, focusing on the pure mechanics of academic engineering.
No motivational fluff, basically.
Exactly. Around 60% of students in top government medical colleges are what they call droppers.
Meaning individuals who take a full post-class 12-year, just entirely dedicated to intensive prep.
Yeah, so you don't achieve this with, like, a highly caffeinated all-nighter. You achieve this by building a machine out of yourself.
Okay, so let's look at the brutal math of the timeline first, because, well, that dictates everything else. You're taking about 1,800 to 2,000 hours of curriculum.
Right, material designed for 2 full years.
Exactly.
Right.
And you're condensing all of it into a 10-month window, because you need those last 2 months purely for testing and revision.
And to fit that volume of information into that tiny window, the sources lay out the first non-negotiable rule of this roadmap, the no 0 days policy.
Ugh, sounds intense.
It is. It demands 10 to 12 hours of highly focused daily study for 365 consecutive days. Elite ranks are won in the consolidation phase.
Meaning what, exactly?
It's where you force your brain to transition from, passively recognizing facts to actively recalling them under extreme psychological pressure.
Okay, but I have to pause here. Because if we are talking about a student starting from zero conceptual understanding, like someone who doesn't have an established baseline of elite study habits, 12 hours a day sounds like an instant recipe for severe burnout. I mean, how does a normal human brain not just completely shut down and quit by week 2?
Well, that's actually the most common point of failure. And it's a completely predictable psychological response. The roadmap addresses this head-on by warning students about something called the Valley of Disappointment.
The Valley of Disappointment, that sounds ominous.
Very. For someone with weak foundational basics, the first 3 months of this 12-hour grind are going to be agonizing. You are putting in Olympic-level effort, but because your neural pathways haven't fully formed to synthesize all that data yet.
Your mock test scores are going to be terrible.
Exactly. The psychological friction is at its absolute peak.
So you're basically putting in the maximum amount of work for the minimum amount of visible reward.
Precisely.
Yeah.
But surviving that valley is structurally mandatory. The data from topper success stories is completely unequivocal here. Score growth does not happen linearly.
You don't just gain like 10 points every week.
Right. The exponential growth curve only violently arcs upward in the final 6 months. You're laying the underground foundation in those first 3 months. If you abandon the system while you're in the valley...
You never get to see the house actually get built.
Yeah.
But, I mean, you can't just mandate 12 hours of sheer willpower. Willpower depletes. If the commitment requires that kind of daily volume without your brain melting, there has to be a structural mechanism for how those hours are spent. You can't just stare at a textbook for half a day.
Which brings us directly to the 12-hour mastery routine. This isn't just a schedule. It is really a masterclass in cognitive energy management. Neurological research dictates that you must align the complexity of a task with your brain's natural energy peaks.
Yeah, I found the specific breakdown of this timetable in our sources totally fascinating. Let's unpack the sequence. So the day starts early at 6:30 a.m. with block 1, which is physics. Why start the day with universally the most intimidating subject?
Because physics requires incredibly heavy conceptual lifting and abstract numerical problem solving. It demands peak function from your prefrontal cortex. You need a completely fresh cognitive slate for that.
So you wouldn't want to do that at night?
Definitely not. If you attempt to learn vector calculus or rotational mechanics at 9:00 p.m. after studying all day, your cognitive load is entirely maxed out. Your brain literally will not encode the logic.
That makes perfect sense. Do the heavy lifting when the battery is at 100%. And then following that, there's a breakfast break with 0 screens, which I think is brilliant. Just a pure sensory reset.
Yeah, it's crucial.
And then you hit block 2 from 10:00 a.m. to 1:00 p.m. That's chemistry. Strategically split between physical chemistry and then organic or inorganic. After that is a lunch break and a mandatory 20 to 30-minute power nap.
We really should linger on that nap for a second. Students often feel guilty for sleeping during the day, like they're wasting time, but that nap is a biological imperative.
Wait, really? It's that important?
Oh, absolutely. It is how your brain transfers short-term information out of the hippocampus and integrates it into the neocortex for long-term storage. It literally clears your working memory capacity, so you are physically capable of learning again in the afternoon.
Wow, okay. So you need that cleared working memory for block 3. From 2:30 p.m. to 5:30 p.m., which is entirely dedicated to biology. And this block is heavily focused on theory-dense reading and drawing diagrams.
Right. Notice the deliberate transition of the subjects there. The routine moves from the purely logical and numerical in the early morning to the heavily memory-based and narrative in the afternoon.
Because the brain is getting tired.
Exactly. When the brain is slightly fatigued, it is neurologically much easier to read narrative biological text or, practice the spatial memory of a diagram than it is to derive a complex physics formula.
Makes sense. Then following biology, the schedule mandates an hour of physical activity, specifically to metabolize the day's accumulated cortisol. And then the evening blocks are dedicated to solving multiple choice questions, MCQs, and updating what they call the error book.
Which is vital, yeah.
We're definitely going to dive into the error book deeply in a moment, but before we do, I had a massive structural question. How does a student possibly wake up and study Class 12 electrostatics for 3 hours if they completely bombed Class 11?
Yeah, that is the elephant in the room for anyone attempting this from a baseline of 0. The roadmap solves this with a framework called dependency learning. The fatal flaw most students make is treating Class 11 and Class 12 as separate chronological silos.
So you don't just crack open Chapter 1 of Class 12 on day 1 and hope the confusion eventually clears up.
No, because it won't. You have to map the prerequisites. If your schedule says you need to learn Class 12 electrostatics this week, but you never understood Class 11 vectors and the basic laws of motion.
You're just going to hit a brick wall.
Exactly. The system dictates that you learn the Class 11 Gateway chapter immediately before the Class 12 application. You must master General Organic Chemistry, or GOC, from Class 11 before you even glance at a Class 12 organic reaction mechanism.
So you're building custom bridges between the years. I like that. Okay, so now that we have the engine built with the daily schedule and we are strategically mapping the prerequisites, what exactly is the student pouring these 12 hours a day into? Because the sources issue a massive glaring warning about something called the library trap.
The library trap. It's really a symptom of academic insecurity. A student starting from 0 often feels like they are behind, so they overcompensate by buying 5 different advanced textbooks.
Like materials meant for an entirely different, harder exam, like JATE bands?
Right, hoping the secret to success is hidden in some esoteric knowledge.
Yeah.
But it demoralizes them completely because the material is out of scope and unnecessarily complex.
But our sources are adamant that the primary anchor, the non-negotiable holy grail for NEET, is just the NCERT textbook. The data states that nearly 95 to 100% of biology and chemistry questions are derived directly from NCERT lines, tables, and diagrams.
Oh, right there.
So if the material is right there in front of everyone, the differentiator is how you extract that knowledge. Let's walk through the phased command system for each subject. Let's start with biology.
Well, biology is your anchor. It constitutes 50% of the total marks on the exam. The target for an elite rank here is 340 to 360 out of 360.
Basically perfect.
Yeah. For a 0 baseline student, the strategy relies on inward-outward mastery. You do not sit down and try to memorize a page on day 1. Step 1 is passive mapping.
What does a student actually do during passive mapping, like practically?
You read the chapter like it's a novel. You aren't taking notes. You are just trying to understand the overarching biological logic and build a mental scaffolding.
Okay, got it.
Once you have the scaffolding, you move to step 2, which is structural annotation. This is where you actively hunt for the traps. The sources point out that every single exception listed in the text and every subtle label on a diagram is a potential exam question designed to catch you off guard.
Oh, wow. And then you transition to visual memory building, where you have to be able to reproduce every NCERT flowchart completely from memory. And finally, keyword integration. Because neat biology isn't about vague conceptual descriptions, it's about hyper precise scientific nomenclature.
Exactly. The wording and the options will be designed to confuse you if you don't know the exact terminology.
Now, when we look at chemistry, the strategy completely shifts. The target here is 160 to 180 marks. Chemistry isn't just one subject, it's an academic triathlon. You need three completely different cognitive skill sets.
It really is a trilateral discipline, and treating all of chemistry the same is a fatal error.
Hmm.
Let's break down the triathlon. First, you have physical chemistry. Think of this like the swimming leg. It requires rhythmic breathing, pacing, and calculated logic.
So you can't just memorize the Nernst equation or the Reet law?
No, you have to understand the mathematical derivation behind the formula, because the exam will present a twisted scenario that breaks the standard formula.
Right. Then you transition to the second leg, inorganic chemistry. If physical chemistry is the calculated swim, inorganic is the brutal uphill bike sprint. It doesn't require deep abstract logic. It requires pure brute force endurance to memorize periodic trends and exceptions.
Yeah, the roadmap mandates consistent daily reading of the NCERT and heavy use of active recall flashcards for that.
And the final leg of the triathlon is organic chemistry. As we mentioned with dependency learning, this is the run. It's about momentum and mechanisms.
Right. If you truly understand foundational electron effects like inductive and resonance effects from your GOC foundation, you don't need to memorize 100 individual reactions. You can look at the molecules and logically predict how they will interact.
Which brings us to the final hurdle, physics. The absolute rank differentiator. The target is 140 to 160 marks. And for a lot of students starting from zero, this is the subject that induces genuine panic.
It induces panic because it exposes a lack of conceptual clarity faster than any other subject. The strategy here is conceptual priming. You build the theory first by watching high-quality lectures to see exactly how formulas are derived in real time.
And the sources emphasize maintaining a very strict formula bank.
Okay.
But wait, if I understand the sources correctly, it's not just a ledger of equations. Like, if I just memorize v equals u plus a t, why isn't that enough? I mean, math is math, isn't it?
Because in an exam designed to filter out 2.3 million people, math is never just math. The formula bank must be highly conditional.
What does that mean?
You don't just write down v equals u plus at. You write it down, and next to it, you write in bold red letters, only applicable for constant acceleration. The exam setters will intentionally give you a problem with variable acceleration, knowing that millions of students will blindly apply the standard formula.
And they'll arrive at the perfectly placed trap answer in option A.
Exactly.
Oh, that's brutal. But, knowing the conditions of a formula in a notebook is entirely different from retrieving it when a timer is ticking and your heart is pounding. Even with the perfect NCERT strategy, a student starting from zero is inevitably going to hit a massive psychological wall the second they have to actually calculate an answer and they get it wrong. We really need to talk about how this roadmap cures the fear of numericals.
This is perhaps the most profound psychological insight in the entire strategy. Disliking questions or avoiding numericals isn't usually a deficit in intelligence. It is a biological defense mechanism against the fear of failure.
So when a student operates with a fixed mindset, every wrong answer feels like a permanent indictment of their intelligence.
Yes.
So how do you transition an anxious brain into a growth mindset, where a wrong answer is stripped of its emotion and just treated as a raw data point? The sources outline a clinical four-step desensitization process that essentially acts like exposure therapy for math anxiety.
That's a great way to put it. Step one is the solved example phase. For the first week of a new intimidating chapter, you do not attempt to solve questions blindly. You study 50 solved examples.
Just reading them.
Yeah, you are literally just observing how an expert's brain works, watching how they extract the relevant data from a dense word problem and select the correct formula.
Then you move to step 2, slow motion practice. You take 20 questions and you remove the clock entirely. You just sit in the struggle and let your brain wrestle with the logic. If you get it wrong, you don't instantly flip to the answer key for the dopamine hit of the solution.
Right, you go back and reread the theory. And once that underlying logic finally clicks, you move to step 3, the high-volume sprint. You sit down and crank out 50 to 100 MCQs in a single sitting.
Wow. But the goal here isn't deep philosophical thought, right? It's rapid pattern recognition.
Exactly. You are training your brain to see that the exam actually just repeats the same 4 or 5 question archetypes over and over, just swapping out the numbers and the framing.
And finally, step 4, timed simulation. You take 45 to 50 questions and set a hard 45-minute timer. This artificially induces the cortisol and adrenaline of the actual exam room, so your nervous system doesn't freeze up on test day.
But here is the linchpin of the entire 12-month process. When you do these time simulations, you are going to get things wrong. What you do in the 10 minutes after you get a question wrong dictates your final rank. You must maintain an error book.
Ah, yes. So the error book isn't just a ledger of failures where you copy down the correct answer.
No, simply copying the correct answer is completely useless. In the error book, you log the question, but more importantly, you log the exact reason for the cognitive failure.
So was it a fundamental conceptual gap? Was it a silly calculation mistake because you rushed?
Or did you just misread the word incorrect as correct in the prompt? You write down the flawed logic you used, and then you write down the correct logic. By month 10, this book is essentially a highly personalized diagnostic map of every cognitive bias and flaw in your specific brain.
That is so powerful. But let's be realistic about a one-year plan starting from zero. You're going to fall behind at some point. You might get sick, or maybe rotational mechanics takes 3 weeks instead of 1. Backlogs are going to form. If you're operating on a relentless 12-hour schedule, how do you keep a backlog from derailing the entire year?
You apply the 60.40 rule. When a backlog forms, the natural human instinct is to stop everything, pause the current curriculum, and try to catch up.
Which makes sense intuitively.
But it's a fatal error, because by doing that, you instantly create a new backlog for the current week's material. Instead, you dedicate 60% of your daily study time to the current topics to stop the bleeding. You use the remaining 40% to systematically and calmly clear the old chapters. You prioritize consistency over chaotic intensity.
Okay, so if the student commits to the daily 12-hour schedule, they anchor everything to the NCERT texts, they systematically desensitize their fear of calculations, and they ruthlessly track their cognitive flaws in the error book. How do they actually know if they are on track over the span of a year? We need to look at the long-term calendar. What are the milestones to go from 0 to top 1,000?
The roadmap divides the year into 4 distinct phases. Phase 1 covers months 1 through 4, foundation building. During this phase, you are entirely focused on rebuilding Class 11 basics and overlapping them with early Class 12 topics. Testing is strictly chapter-wise.
And crucially, we do not care about speed in Phase 1.
Not at all. The only metric that matters is accuracy. We are aiming for greater than 85%.
That makes total sense because emphasizing speed on a broken conceptual foundation just means you arrive at the wrong answer faster. Then we hit Phase 2, months 5 through 8. What happens then?
This is core syllabus completion. By the end of month 8, you are aiming to hit 70% of the total NEET syllabus. This is where you introduce bi-weekly part syllabus mock tests. The target score here isn't the Elite 700 yet. You are just trying to cross the 550 mark.
Got it. And Phase 3, months 9 and 10, is where the heat really turns up. Advanced application and full mocks. You hit 100% syllabus completion by the end of month 10. And this is when you transition to weekly full syllabus mocks under exact exam conditions.
Meaning sitting at your desk from 2:00 p.m. to 5:20 p.m., matching the biological clock to the real exam. And the target score jumps to 620 plus.
Which leaves the final window, Phase 4, months 11 and 12, peak performance.
Right. You are no longer learning new concepts. You are executing iterative revisions using exclusively the highlighted NCERT books and your error book. You're taking 2 to 3 full mocks a week and aggressively pushing that target score into the Elite 680 to 700 plus range.
I really think the beauty of this 4-phase progression is how it deliberately avoids the perfection trap. If a student expects to score 700 in month 2, the psychological blow of scoring a 300 will just make them quit in month 3. It only demands elite-level perfection at the very end, allowing the student to build their speed and their accuracy progressively.
It really is a pure process of extreme academic engineering. Success in an arena this statistically terrifying isn't a mystery, and it certainly isn't magic. It is the highly predictable outcome of sustained, intelligently directed effort.
So what does this all mean for you, the listener? Whether you are gearing up for NEET, studying for the bar exam, prepping for a massive certification, or honestly just tackling any giant, intimidating life goal, the formula translates perfectly. You do not rely on motivation because motivation is fleeting.
It always is.
You break the intimidating goal down into a phased command system. You figure out what your primary anchor material is, and you ignore the noise of the library trap. You build a daily, energy-optimized routine that respects your biology. And most importantly, you strip the emotion out of failure by turning your mistakes into cold, hard data inside an error book.
You meticulously build the machine, and then you trust the machine to do the work.
If elite medical performance, which is objectively one of the hardest, most competitive academic feats in the world, is truly just a predictable outcome of extreme academic engineering and a strict 12-hour discipline, it really makes you wonder, how much of what we casually call natural genius in the real world is actually just invisible, perfectly executed systems? What could you achieve if you stopped relying on flashes of inspiration and built an error book for your own life? Take some time to think about that and start building your phase one today.